This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC Podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 229 of the GardenDC Podcast. In this episode, we talk with Mark Weathington, director, and Tim Alderton, research technician, both at the JC Raulston Arboretum, all about Mahonia. The plant profile is on hardy Cyclamen, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on unique Basil from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Mark Weathington and Tim Alderton. Mark is the director of the JC Raulston Arboretum in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Tim is the research technician there. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to talk about all things Mahonia and probably a little bit about North Carolina gardening too. But before we get into that, Mark, you've been on the podcast before. We had you way back in March 2023, where you talked all about Daphne, Edgeworthia, and their relatives. Anything new going on with you personally or professionally in the last 2 years?
Well, just plugging along here at the Arboretum, doing some garden renovations. So we've got a lot of new things here to see, a lot of new things planted out. Other than that, it's just been trying to hold on with both hands as the days seem to be shorter and shorter, and the weeks shorter and shorter, and the years shorter and shorter with so much going on.
Yep, time does fly. And how about you, Tim? You're new to the GardenDC podcast, so we like to ask our new guests, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb?
I think so. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and my family had a small, or still does have a small greenhouse where they sell mostly annuals and vegetables. And I grew up helping there since I was, probably 5. So I have a little over 40 years in horticulture. So in reality, but I've been here at the Arboretum for now over 19 years. So I have a fair amount of experience with growing things here in the Southeast.
And what are your duties include at the Arboretum there, Tim?
Well, taking care of the gardens, or at least attempting to. Anything from weeding, mulching, working with volunteers, interacting with the public, you name it, I probably have done something with it over the last 19 years.
Well, it sounds like you get a lot of soil under your fingernails.
Right now, they're not too bad, but it's Monday.
Yep. And do you do any home gardening, Tim?
Actually, I live in an apartment, so I have 10 acres here I get to work with, and then I get to go home actually and relax a little bit. So,
yeah, I can imagine you get all your gardening out of your system at work. So Tim and Mark recently presented a talk to JC Raulston Arboretum followers on Mahonia. So I asked them to kind of reprise that for us for this episode of GardenDC. And before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about the Arboretum and give it a little bit of a shout out for those who are listening internationally or not familiar with Raleigh, North Carolina and the Arboretum. Mark, can you give us a little bit of an overview?
Sure. The short and long of it for the Arboretum is that we're a part of North Carolina State University. Small garden, as Tim mentioned, 10.5 acres, but we grow a lot here. We've got about 8,000 different plants out in the collections. What we do here is really we grow plants and evaluate them and then try to get them in the hands of nurserymen and homeowners and landscapers. So we do kind of everything from, serving as a living laboratory for students here at NC State to working with the nursery industry to help them grow. And then we do a lot of education for youth and avid gardeners. Gardening wise, it's a pretty great place to garden. We get about 3 to 4 inches of rain every month on average. Of course, that's in the late summer, early fall. That can be all in, 1 or 2 rain events for the month, and it's dry otherwise. But we have 4 good seasons and generally relatively moderate temperatures. So we can grow a lot from a lot of places around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's also a wonderful arboretum to visit and see the collections. And if you're ever in Raleigh, it's just one of the many great gardening attractions there.
Yeah, and it's free. So you can come and enjoy anytime.
Free is always good. All right. So what made you choose the Mahonia topic, Mark?
Well, Mahonias have always been important here at the Arboretum. They were one of JC Raulston's favorite plants, who the Arboretum's now named after, who started the Arboretum and really set the tone for how we share our plants and our knowledge and our passion for what we do. So it was actually the last things he was planting before he had an unfortunate car accident and passed away. And then we love the plants, and they've gotten a bit of a bad name because really one bad actor, Mahonia bealii, the leatherleaf Mahonia, which can seed around quite a bit in the wild. And so, we're always, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we hear people saying ugly things about Mahonia, and they're wonderful plants, tough evergreens with often fragrant flowers, anytime from late summer, early fall, all the way through spring. So we want to bring some of the other ones that people don't know to their attention.
Mm-hmm. And Tim, what do you consider the most positive attributes of Mahonia?
They're really versatile. There's some that will take full sun, blazing sun that's hot and dry, that you might see from the southwestern United States. And the ones in the Pacific Northwest aren't always as happy here in Raleigh, but we can grow some of them. And then the Asian ones, they just do spectacularly well here and give us color throughout fall, winter, and spring are their key times for flowering, depending on the species. But you can have something almost, I'd say, 9 months of the year, we could have a Mahonia in flower, maybe even longer than that, just if you have enough in your collection. So it's just a really versatile group of plants.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the reason people might grow it in their garden, because it is so tough, I think salt resistant, almost pollution resistant, seems to take a lot of different soil conditions. And as you said, can go from sun to different exposures. But I grow it because you get that winter bloom when pretty much nothing else is blooming. And I noticed some early pollinators on mine.
Yeah. They are great for pollinators.
We have bees in our garden, and the honeybees, as well as native bees, will get that are early, come out and get those. The few times I've actually seen rufous hummingbird out here in this area have been in November and February, and they were actually feeding on the Mahonia, which is native to the western, equivalent to what they would have in the western United States or northern Mexico, where they winter. So they're familiar with those as well.
I've never seen hummingbird. I need to look out for that. That's a great point. That's native to their overwintering ground, so they would know it from that.
Yeah, and one of the things here in the South, especially, we have earlier this week, while it's chilly today, we have had, and we always have in the middle of winter, some days, sometimes weeks, where we're getting up above 60, getting into the 70s sometimes, and the pollinators are active during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these winter blooming things are, they're kind of balms for our soul on a ugly day, but we do need to provide food for all these pollinators that start being active during those times.
Mm-hmm. And I think that sweet fragrance that you mentioned before is also one of the great attributes of it. I would describe it as kind of honey-like, maybe a light floral honey.
Depends on the species. We have one Mahonia trifoliata, which to me smells like chocolate. We have a Mahonia japonica, which for me, we can't grow lily of the valley really well down here, but it smells just like lily of the valley. And so that brings back memories from being back home in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. How about you, Mark? Is there any specific fragrance that it reminds you of?
I have a terrible, terrible sense of smell. I can smell Mahonia, but it's not terribly noticeable smell to me in the garden. There are just some fragrances that I can register and some that I cannot. It's like being partially, it's like being colorblind or having trouble hearing, low notes or things like that.
Well, let's talk about some of the physical attributes of it. So usually it's a light yellow to dark yellow, kind of a spray of flowers coming off the top, depending on the variety or cultivar. And then the foliage is very holly-like, but on a tall, thin stem. How would you describe it, Tim?
Oh, there's a lot of variety there too as well. Like, again, I was mentioning one of the southwestern species, Mahonia trifoliolata, which has 3 leaflets on each leaf, but they're a blue-green, and they are, it's very prickly. It does look holly-like, but you would not expect it, that blue color to it. And there's several other species from the Southwest that also have that same attribute. Some of the Mexican species, they don't even have the spines on them, but they'll be these pinnate leaves, much friendlier to work with, though not quite as hardy as some of the others. And they vary in size. Some of the Asian species, the leaf itself might be 12, even 15, and maybe even 18 inches long, while others will only be just a couple inches. Some are more feather-like and soft, like Mahonia uribracteata. Soft caress is a selection of that. And there is quite a bit of variety there that you don't always think about. At least for us, we have that capability of growing, and you should up in the DC area as well. So,
yeah, and that brings up one of the other attributes of it is pretty much evergreen. Like you might get some of the foliage dropping off or changing out, but new would be emerging at the same time.
Yeah, they're as far as I know, all the species are evergreen, and they tend to have cane-like growth, so they tend to have single stems that grow upwards, especially most of the Asian species. They're very upright plants. And a lot of times people try to cut them back, and you can do that, but they'll just really start growing from right where you cut them back. It doesn't cause them necessarily to be a whole lot bushier. But if you see old ones that have been let go and they're these tall, almost palm tree, like miniature palm tree kind of things, they can be really, really beautiful like that. But for some reason, we like to keep all our plants low to the ground. But talking about their variability in foliage and things like that, there are many taxonomists, botanists who like to look at dead pressed flat specimens, have lumped all the Mahonias and Barberries together as Barberry. But most of the data shows that really they should be separate, and actually Mahonia should be split into a couple of different genera, which would take those southwestern ones, like the trifoliate ones with blue-green leaves that Tim was talking about, and put those in a whole nother genus called Berberis. So they're different enough that really, from just a strictly botanical sorting way, they can be put into different genuses.
I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because I had heard the Barberry family, and again, that pricks your ear up and makes you think invasive, but also doesn't seem to be that closely related, as you're saying, to the rest of the barberries.
No, it really isn't. And we got to remember, when we're talking about families, it's in the barberry family, but so are our native Mayapples, Podophyllum peltatum. Those are in the barberry family. And the epimediums that we all love to grow in our woodland gardens, those are in the barberry family as well. There's, family relationships, just like in people, family relationships in plants can be pretty wide. And I'd say the barberries, it's really Berberis thunbergii that's a real invasive problem. The other barberries, for the most part, have not proven to be any kind of problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's over 500 species of barberry, and so there's just a couple that have any issues, and they range from all over the place, from South America and the North America, and mostly in Asia, though, and a few in Europe as well. So, in that expanse, there's bound to be something that's not going to be of an issue.
Mm-hmm. Good point, Tim. And Tim, since Mark brought up how the canes can get a little tall on you and people just chop them off for management, what's your recommendation as far as pruning? Would you take out like an errant cane all the way to the ground, or do you give it just like that 3-foot chop off that kind of Mark described that many homeowners are doing?
Oh, I mean, you could do it that way. I would like to stagger them if I do prune them. They will, like Mark said, they're going to sprout out. If anyone's grown a nandina, that's another plant that's very closely related, or fairly closely related. It's also in the Berberidaceae. And they kind of act much like them. So where you cut them, you're going to get a branch or just a couple branches. It's not going to be a proliferation and be denser because of multiple branches, but it's going to be denser because you cut it back and you initiated a bud lower down. So my recommendation would be to do more of a staggered pruning. Don't just shear them off at one level.
Good. And sometimes it'll throw up a new cane coming out from the side. Do you encourage them? Are they easy to dig and divide if you want to move it around?
Less so than a nandina. They typically keep a distinct trunk more to them. They don't divide in the sense that the nandina do. So yeah, you can start them from cuttings or seeds. So not easily by division.
The Asian ones especially are very easy by cuttings, and we do them just about any time of year. The southwestern ones and the Mexican and Central American ones can be a lot trickier to propagate by cuttings.
I will say the western species like aquifolium, the Oregon grape holly, and some repins, which is another low-growing one, they tend to sucker more than will actually form a colony. But like Mark said, the Asian ones, which we grow much more commonly in this area here, they don't spread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm growing the Oregon grape holly myself, the Pacific Northwest native one.
Yep.
And with the one that's termed invasive in many of our areas, I think that's Belii, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's the one that seems to reseed itself really readily, and I'm going to blame the birds in part for that.
Oh yeah, the birds will eat those, and they'll excrete them too. That
Mhm.
eat the fruit, and then it's a diuretic, and it makes them drop those seeds and help it spread.
Yeah, you don't see, that Mahonia belii you mostly see in older landscapes.
Mhm.
It's not being sold much anymore just because it's a pretty coarse textured plant, and it's not the texture most people are looking for in their garden. So just because of tastes changing, less so than because people look at it as being invasive, it has kind of fallen out of favor for some of the finer ones that aren't so prickly, like Mahonia eurybracteata, soft caress, and narihira, which are a little bit smaller or much smaller in the most part, and much less prickly.
Yeah, it's not the nicest one to weed around, I will say. And aside from being, an invasive by spreading by seed. And since you brought up, Tim, the Oregon grape holly, the question I always get about it is it edible? Because that sounds like a great name, grape holly. And if it is it all parts, or is it just that little fruit?
As far as I know, they are edible, and I had looked up information before we did our program. And it's like you can make wine, you can make fruit juices out of it, jellies, pies, and cobblers, for instance, can be made out of those fruit. If you really want to take the time to process them and get the seed out of there, it's the pulp that you want, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was presumably in Asia and other places as well, but we know that in the Western species, they were important parts of the diet of indigenous peoples. They brought a lot of nutrients, vitamins, to what otherwise was a diet that was mostly fish and game. So yeah, they were important in that sense for indigenous people.
Yeah, I had heard it was made into fruit leathers and used that way, and then also had some medicinal use as well.
Another use I did find out for the one I mentioned earlier, Trifolia alata in the Southwest, was they even used the seed. They roasted it and made a coffee alternative for that. And many of the species, if you ever cut into a barberry, you're going to see the stems are yellow inside. And they've used that as a dye as well. And so there's medicinal purposes too, which I know far less about, and I don't want to comment on those too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that yellow, the compound that makes the yellow dye, while not toxic in any sense while you're pruning plants or dealing with them in larger amounts, can, like most medicinal type things, in the wrong amounts can be harmful. So
Too much of a good thing.
Yeah, don't go making your own berberidine tea or anything.
Yeah, I know, that old adage that it's in the dosage that's the problem.
Right.
And does that make them deer resistant, though, those prickly leaves and that yellow inner bark?
I have not had many problems with deer. I have had deer, kind of experimenting with them, I think, more than actually eating them. But, the ones that are really leathery and prickly, they certainly stay away from. I have had, when they get bigger, some tall ones, the stems will get 2 or 3 inches around, and that is kind of the perfect height, perfect size for deer to rub their antlers on. So I have had some of that, but even if it were to kill the top of that stem, if you cut it off, it'll resprout below that. So, but for the most part, no, they're not a problem.
Tim, are you familiar with any other disease or pest issues on Mahonia in general?
Well, in the garden, whenever we've had small ones, we have a rabbit issue here, and they have actually enjoyed them, I must say. But rabbits will just sometimes taste anything and nip it off. So I don't know whether they find it appetizing or if it's just something to occupy their time. Disease-wise, there are a few, like I think, Mark, you mentioned the other day, some of them get powdery mildew, wasn't it? Like on Fortunii?
Mahonia Fortunii, that's how I can identify it from a distance, is because of the layer of powdery mildew on it. They also are a host for black rust, which can affect grains. And so they're try very hard to keep the disease out of the U.S. So, like importing plants, you have to get certified rust-free plants, and generally it's pretty difficult to import a Mahonia from out of the U.S. because of that. It's not a disease that particularly affects the growth of a Mahonia itself, but it can go to other hosts, which can be a real problem.
And so there are no native to the East Coast or this side of the Mississippi Mahonia, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So the ones that we're growing or might have purchased at a native sale probably are the Pacific Northwest, probably not the southwestern U.S.
Yeah, more than likely. It would be the Oregon grape or one of the similar species like Pinnata, or there's 5 or 6 species out in the western U.S. and Northwest that you'll find.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Groundcover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Groundcover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Groundcover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Groundcover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Do you have a favorite one, Mark, from the southwestern ones?
From the southwestern ones, well, they tend to be quite prickly plants. So one of the ones I like from down that way, southwest and into Mexico, is Mahonia gracilis, which tends to grow more as a shrubby plant, not incredibly long inflorescences, but it just makes a nice deep green plant, not prickly, whereas the others are vicious plants. And they're neat looking, but the gracilis is really one of the better landscape. It blends into our landscapes, our typical eastern landscapes, a little bit better than some of the others do.
Yeah, it can actually take shearing and look nice as more of a sheared type shrub than the others. So it fits that not meatball style, but it's more rounded, less cane-like.
Is that a full sun plant for us, and how is the hardiness?
It grows full sun to part shade. Some of the other southwestern ones, like the trifoliolata, hematocarpa, and some of those, really need full sun and very well drained soils, are kind of what you think of when you think of southwestern plants. But gracilis can take some shade. And hardiness, it's certainly a zone 7 plant. I don't know if it would tolerate colder than that. Tim, I don't remember ours ever getting much in the way of damage, even during cold winters.
Not really. The flowers do open fairly early, and I have had some damage on partially open flowers getting damaged if we have a late freeze. We have to get fairly cold, below 20 to have that.
And that's only after they begin to open, not midwinter.
And for the ones that are coming from Asia, is there one that makes a really good or outstanding garden plant?
Gosh, I like so many of those. Probably the one that is going to appeal to most people is the one that soft cress and narihira are derived from, and that's Mahonia uribracteata, variety or subspecies genpenensis, which has a much finer, feathery type arrangement of leaflets, is a little bit less spiny than some other ones. So that's probably where, in terms of marketability and sales, those are probably the better ones. I do like the Mahonia gracilipes, which has very, very silvery white bottoms to the leaves. Like if you flip those leaflets over, they have a white waxy underside to them, and the flowers on those have red to them. So most of the Mahonias are really, from pale to deep yellow gold, and this is one that has more a red tone to the flowers.
Interesting. How about you, Tim?
I was going to mention gracilipes. It is a little bit, I love the color of the foliage. The plant is not as vigorous as some of the others. I will say that. It gives a little bit different appearance to them. And it's not going to be that strictly upright thing. But there's a hybrid between that and, I have to use my nitens, which is called eminensis, which unfortunately it doesn't have the white undersides very often, but it has a really nice shaped plant, and it's probably a 4 to 5 foot tall plant, and it's densely branched. It's just a really nice happy medium between those two species, nitens and gracilipes, and it makes a really good landscape plant. It flowers in the late summer and into the fall, and it has that those red tones to it. So you get these almost like red, orange, and yellow inflorescence all on one plant. It's very nice, and the bees adore it.
Sounds gorgeous. I might have to add that onto my plant wanted list and see about adding that to my collection. And you all both mentioned soft caress, which is on the market and available at many garden centers. So that is a cultivar, I believe, and pretty recent introduction to the market. I have it. I have never had it bloom. Have you all seen blooms on yours?
Yeah, it flowers here. It flowers late in the fall. And so even for us, we'll sometimes lose some of the flowers late in the season due to a cold snap, because it's still actively growing when we do have that. That first time when, maybe in late November, early December, it'll still be flowering and they can get damaged. But yeah, they do flower here.
Good to know. And for our listeners who haven't seen a soft caress in person or seen one at a garden center, I would describe the foliage as very kind of like a little umbrella pine, like very needle-like but soft, hence the name soft caress, because they're trying to sell you on, yes, you can brush up against it and not be poked, and that it has a nice little shape to it.
Yeah, 3 or 4 feet is maximum I've seen them. Have you seen them any larger than that, Mark?
No, that's about it. Wider than tall. Soft caress is a great plant, but it is, even for us, if we have a cold snap and it is out in the open, growing, kind of open, sunny area, we get burn and occasionally even death if it gets cold enough. Whereas with some shade, high shade, it seems to be just fine. And I think you get much, into 7A, 6B, it's going to start being a real iffy plant. Narihira, which is actually an older plant, but newer to the U.S. market, is probably a little bit more cold hardy. And you're starting to see that more and more at garden centers, in addition to soft grass.
Can you spell that, Mark?
Nari and then Hira. Narihira. And I don't know what that translates to from Japanese, but
yeah, I think that one's a better possibility for many of us in the Mid-Atlantic, because I have lost a soft caress or two, as you described, to the cold. And I actually almost was blaming it on the wet winters, because we do get kind of wet, soggy winters sometime. So that does bring up how much watering many Mahonias like to get.
Yeah, an established Mahonia is pretty drought tolerant, the more traditional ones we grow. But, unless they're in a spot that's so wet it's killing other garden plants, I don't think of them as being, terribly susceptible to that. Now, if they're growing in a spot that's holding water, for extended periods, sure. But, I would put them, with 80% of other landscape shrubs in terms of their tolerance of winter wet, summer wet. The southwestern ones obviously are a little bit different than that. They want it much more well drained. But that soft grass, it's just not quite as hardy. Tim, have you had other experiences than that?
Like with soft caress or other ones?
Other ones in terms of being susceptible to winter moisture.
Most of ours in the garden they're not, I don't have them planted in low lying areas, but I would think if you can plant a barberry there, it's probably going to be fine. And again, unless you're growing the southwestern ones, which if you want to see them in the wild, you can find them in Utah and in Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona. So that gives you any indication where they grow in Texas in the drier climates. So they don't want to be wet at all.
That would be your big clue, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, Mark, for the trade and what's being bred, do you know what direction the new Mahonia that might be coming to the market are looking at?
Sure. There's a variety of things. One, sterility and reduced seed production for sure is a big thing. And with some of these wider crosses between species, that tends to be the outcome anyway. Certainly more of the more spineless, friendlier ones are things people are looking at. But a big part is flower color. There was just one released by one of the professors here at NC State University called Groovy Glow, which has some really beautiful kind of orange colored flowers to them. Funky Flow and Groovy Glow were the two that they just released. I've been impressed with them so far in the garden. That flower color is really stands out in the garden in fall.
I'm trying to imagine a bright, almost day glow orange. What could go with those plants as companions?
Well, I never said I had good taste when it comes to this. Yeah, I don't like tacky.
The other thing I've seen in these hybrids, some of them they're more compact. Those two definitely that have been introduced from NC State. I've looked up. They're only supposed to get 3 to 4 feet tall. So they both have the Eurybracteata in them, and I think that's given them that more compact habit. And Mark mentioned the fewer spines. There's one that I really like, and we just found a little more about it after our conversation we had a week or so ago now. It was Marvel, which is, it only has tip spines on the leaves, and it's much friendlier to work with than a lot of the other Mahonias. And it's a Mahonia hybrida, or media,
Media, yeah.
What did you say it was from? Was it?
It was from Mahonia Media Charity. It was a sport from Charity.
Interesting. And I did think of a good companion for that. For those orange ones, and that's our native azaleas and some of the cultivars like War Eagle that have that kind of bright orange red coloring, and some of the other native azaleas might not be a bad combination.
Yeah, it flowers later, more in the fall for this one, so you'd almost be pairing it more with Japanese maples that are turning, getting fall color.
Mm-hmm.
I could see it with carex, some of the gold foliage carex as planted around it, and it would also pick up some of those warm colors as well.
That would be nice too. So, any rare Mahonias that we haven't talked about yet? How about you, Tim?
Oh my! To me, rare is I'm kind of jaded. So those southwestern ones, to me, our climate's not ideal for them. So they're kind of more rare out here. So one Fremontii is just spectacular. It's a pinnate blue-leafed one as well. But we have one in the garden that's not from that group. It's an Asian one called Shenii, which it's kind of bizarre looking. I don't know. How would you describe it, Mark? It's been very compact, and it doesn't have anything sharp about it. Very rigid and plastic-like.
Yeah.
How would you just...
It's very different. The leaves are, as Tim said, kind of rippled with the veins being deeply impressed, and 3 to 5 or 7 leaflets, and real compact. Is actually surprisingly has been very cold tolerant, and has imbued some hybrids with more cold tolerance, and it's a really neat plant.
Any other rare ones we haven't brought up yet, Mark?
Well, one that I'm really dying to get, but I don't know that it's in the U.S. at all, is Berberis microphylla, which has almost like boxwood-like leaflets on those long stems, which is very, very neat. And there are some forms. We've grown a form of Berberis Mahonia oiwakensis, which from Taiwan. That there's one specific one. We're growing several seedlings from those, but one specific one that I think is a really nice plant. It's a vicious one though, but the leaflets are kind of curved, kind of almost sickle shaped on there, and I think gives it a really interesting presence.
And when the public comes to visit and sees the Mahonia collection, are there any positive or negative comments or any particular ones that stand out?
There are some people who, ask us about why we're growing Mahonia. And we explain to them that, just because there's a bad actor doesn't mean that all of them are bad, that we should get rid of them. A lot of the ones that are not very traditional Mahonia looking, like gracilis, people don't even think of as a Mahonia. They don't notice it as that. But we do get people who ask, when they come through on a winter day, what's that I smell? What's that gold flower? They tend to notice on a warm day all the pollinators. So they react more positively than anything else with them.
And Tim, so there's the Camellia Society, the Azalea Society, Rhododendron Society, all of those. Is there a Mahonia Society?
I'm not aware of one. Are you, Mark? You did an orphan genera symposium a few years ago with that?
Group of some plant lovers who sometimes get together with what we call the orphan genera symposium, and we did a whole symposium with Mahonia, and we've done it with polygonatums and other woodland lilies. Yeah, it's time for us to do another one, maybe a Cuba. But yeah, there's no Mahonia society that I know of.
Well, maybe this episode will spark somebody to start a Mahonia club and do that one. Any other Mahonia advice or care or anything that our listeners should know that we haven't covered yet?
I don't know that there's anything. They're just such easy plants to grow that, there's no reason to not have them. They flower when a lot of other things aren't flowering. We said many of them will tolerate sun or shade. I think, if you're going with some of the Mahonia media types, the upright forms, use them as accent plants. You don't necessarily need to plant them in masses because they are so upright, but they're great for providing those winter flowers for pollinators, and they're kind of no-brainer plants. Just don't plant them, any of the spiny ones, where you're going to be walking barefoot, because when they drop those leaves, they're thick and leathery leaves, and they stay spiny when they drop.
I would agree, Mark, and probably keep them out of the compost pile too.
Yeah, that's helpful.
How about you, Tim? Any final advice on Mahonia care and maintenance?
Well, kind of like what Mark was saying, if it's a large growing one, if you don't have to prune it, don't do it. We don't even have big ones in our collection here, but having seen some in the Pacific Northwest that were 10 or 12 feet tall, they just could theoretically become these majestic plants. And we need to give them more of a chance of that. But realize that there's also, like Mark said, that variety. Don't lump them all together into that BLEI. Realize that they're actually, with the Western species called repens, for instance, you can actually have a small ground cover, only 6 to 12 inches tall, or the mid-sized ones with equifolium might be 3, and those are better in the cooler climates than what we have here. They aren't overly happy for us in Raleigh, but in Pennsylvania, New York, even back home in Pennsylvania, I have a Mahonia equifolium, and it's been there for decades now. But they could never grow those Asian ones that we grow down here. There's something that will grow just about anywhere here in the United States. You just have to find the right one.
I like that, Tim. So a Mahonia for every situation.
Yeah.
And so how can our listeners contact you and find out more, Mark?
Well, the easiest thing to do is go to our website, jcra.ncsu.edu. And on our website we have all of our names and email addresses. We like to talk to people, so we don't make you fill out a contact us form that goes into the abyss somewhere. We do like to respond. Tim is out in the garden a lot, and I get a lot of emails, so we don't always respond in 24 hours, but we do try and respond. I'd also say if you want to, more information about plants, we've got the JC Raulston Arboretum has an incredible YouTube channel. That's Tim and myself and our director of horticulture and guests and our curator talking about all kinds of topics on there. We do an online program every Wednesday at 3. That's free for anybody. You just log on, and then all of those are posted on YouTube usually the following week. So there's just hundreds of videos with great information on there.
Terrific. Thank you, Mark. So for throwing this out for both of you, and while I have you, any favorite plants that you're getting obsessed with lately?
Getting obsessed with lately. Lately is the hard part. Because I'm always obsessed. A group that we've been looking at a lot, mostly, because they're great plants, but also because they tend to be a bit more deer resistant, is the Alyssiums, some of the other species and the selections of Alyssium, both our native Floridanum and Parviflorum, but also the Asians, Anisatum, and Simonsii, and Wardii, and Morillii, and the Mexicanum. There's so many great plants in that group that I think there's a lot more to look at there. Boy, we go down these holes of plant hardy. Personally, hardy gesneriads.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
So many little African violet relatives that are perfectly hardy for us. I'm liking those, especially at my own house. But yeah, it's we're constantly kind of going deep dives in different genera.
So I'll have to have you back on sometime soon, both of you, Tim and Mark. And Tim, you were echoing that hardy gesneriads. Definitely sound very fascinated to hear about them, because I grow a lot of African violets, but would never have thought about putting one outside.
We have one primulina in the garden, which kind of looks like an African violet, and it's from Southeast Asia, and it has been out, I think, 4 winters now, and I don't think it's been phased. It doesn't flower until real late in the season, but it has fleshy rosettes, and I did not think that thing was going to be hardy.
Wow.
It has been fun.
Great. Well, something to look forward to, and we'll definitely have you back on the GardenDC podcast. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Mark, for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Yes.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Teri Speight, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Love, exciting and new. Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever. It's
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships at Bermudan and British Registry.
Hardy Cyclamen Plant Profile. Hardy Cyclamen are flowering perennials that typically bloom from fall to spring. The blooms range in color from white, pink, magenta, red, or lavender. They are members of the primrose family. Cyclamen are native to Europe and the Mediterranean, where they typically grow on rocky slopes. Hardy cyclamen species can grow in USDA zones 4 to 9. The garden hardy species include Cyclamen heterofolium, Cyclamen silicuan, and Cyclamen coum. They prefer to grow among the root zones of trees or shrubs, and because they are often small in size, should be placed on the edges of pathways or on shaded slopes so you can see and enjoy them. Their leaves are heart or kidney shaped with marbled variegations. Many collect them just for the attractive foliage. Cyclamen go dormant in the summer. The plants grow from a round tuber, and they should be placed in soil with good drainage so they don't rot. It is especially important that they stay relatively dry during the summer months. Common names for hardy cyclamen include alpine violet and Persian violet, though they are neither a violet nor from Persia. Another common name for them is sowbread, because pigs like to dig up and eat the tubers, apparently. Interestingly, hardy cyclamen are considered deer-resistant. Hardy cyclamen are bee-pollinated and can be propagated by division or freshly collected seeds. Hardy Cyclamen, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I finally spotted the blooms of the tiny winter aconite patch in my garden under some leaves. I pulled the leaves back and they are blooming sunnily away there. In garden tips that we shared on social media this past week included that February is National Bird Feeding Month, and to have long-lasting cut hellebore flowers, give the stems a long diagonal cut and then dip them in quick dip before placing them in a vase with water. The February 2025 issue of Washington Gardener magazine is out, and the cover story is our 17 award-winning garden photos from our annual garden photo contest. So check that out at washingtongardener.blogspot.com. Stories in the issue include how to care for winter-damaged azaleas, flip those tiles to grow more bulbs, can pomegranates grow in the DMV region? Quick answer, yes. The wax ivy houseplant, using fireplace ashes in the garden, winter hardy weeds, distinctive rosettes, a new gaillardia, and it's time to start sweet peppers from seed, and much more in that issue. For our local gardening events in the region, if you are in the Washington, D.C. area, you might want to attend Nature Forward's 6th annual Taking Nature Black Conference, Reclamation and Resilience from March 5th to 8th, and that is hosted by Nature Forward based in Chevy Chase, Maryland. You can register for that at natureforward.org. Next, on Saturday, March 8th, is Rooting DC 2025. That takes place at the Eastern Senior High School on East Capitol Street in Washington, D.C. You can find out information about registering for that for free at eventbrite.com. Winning Plants for Containers takes place Saturday, March 15th at 10:30 a.m., and this is a class at Green Spring Gardens in Northern Virginia, and you can find out more about that at fairfaxcounty.gov parks, part of their website. And whether it's flower pots, hanging baskets, or window boxes, container gardens are beautiful, easy, and rewarding for winter gardening. And then looking ahead, the Native Plant Sale and Large Symposium at the U.S. National Arboretum is happening on Saturday, March 29th. Check for details on that at fona.org. And then I am hosting a seed saving and swap session at the Spring 2025 Natural Living Expo on Sunday, March 30th at 12 noon. This is part of Pathways Magazine full day expo, and you can find out more about that at pathwaysmagazineonline.com. This will take place at the Hilton McLean Tyson's Corner in McLean, Virginia. And bring your extra seeds to trade, but no worries. If you don't have any, we'll have plenty to share. Happy gardening.
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Food Gardening Network, with an article by Amanda MacArthur, The Most Unique Types of Basil You've Never Tried. I never expected a routine trip to my local food co-op to revolutionize my cooking and gardening life. Standing in the herbs section that spring morning, I was absent-mindedly rubbing basil leaves between my fingers, a chef's habit for tasting freshness with different types of basil, when the most extraordinary aroma stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't the familiar sweet basil I'd been growing and cooking with for years. This leaf released an intoxicating blend of licorice, mint, and something almost floral. That first encounter with Thai basil led to an hour of discovery as I moved from plant to plant, each variety sharing its unique fragrance. The produce manager, seeing my enthusiasm, shared stories of how local chefs used each type. Lemon basil in seafood dishes, cinnamon basil in desserts, and holly basil in aromatic Thai curries. By the time I left, My basket was full of different types of basil plants, and my mind was spinning with culinary possibilities. Now, a decade later, my garden hosts over 20 different basil varieties each season, each one chosen for its distinct contribution to my cooking. The world of basil extends far beyond the familiar sweet Genovese variety we typically find in supermarkets. While that classic basil makes an unbeatable pesto, exploring other varieties opens up entirely new culinary horizons. I've discovered that cinnamon basil, with its warm, spicy sweetness, transforms ordinary sugar cookies into sophisticated treats and adds an unexpected dimension to homemade ice cream. Green Ruffles basil brings both beauty and function to the kitchen garden. Its deeply crinkled leaves create an architectural presence that sets it apart from common sweet basil, while also serving a clever culinary purpose. Those wrinkles increase the leaf surface area, packing more essential oils and flavor into every bite. In my kitchen, I found it offers the familiar sweet basil taste we all love, but with extra depth and a subtle peppery finish. Those grippy ruffle leaves also make it perfect for dishes where you want the basil to really hang on to sauces and dressings. Among the most fascinating types of basil I've grown is the lesser-known African blue basil, a sterile hybrid that combines intense camphor notes with clove-like undertones. Its complex flavor profile comes from elevated levels, making it a standout choice for adventurous cooks. One of my absolute favorites for pure aromatic power is the holy basil, or tulsi. This sacred plant in Hindu tradition contains high levels of beta-carpholine, creating a powerful fragrance that's both peppery and clove-like. The concentration of these aromatic compounds is so high that a single plant can perfume an entire garden corner. Persian basil deserves a special mention for its unique, intense, slightly medicinal flavor profile. Its leaves contain unusually high concentrations of methylchavidcol, creating an ensign-forward taste that's completely different from what most gardeners expect from basil. I found it makes an extraordinary addition to Persian-style rice dishes and meat marinades. Through years of experimentation, I've discovered that growing different types of basil in close proximity can actually enhance their aromatic qualities through competitive stress responses. This phenomenon, known as allelopathy, causes plants to increase their production of defensive compounds, in this case, the very essential oils we prize for their flavors and fragrances. And if you're ready to dive deeper into the world of basil cultivation, don't miss our comprehensive basil gardening guide. It's packed with detailed growing instructions, companion planting recommendations, and tips for maximizing essential oil production in all your favorite varieties. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at Food Gardening.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.